So welcome to the last session of this magnificent conference to honor our Malfono Urabod Malfone. That is our Malfono par excellence, whose entire career focused not only at producing superb scholarship, but also at supporting heritage students. I have spoken on the first day how had it not been for Sebastian's support, I would most likely not be amongst you today and would probably be a miserable engineer somewhere. Some of us who were once heritage students, like myself, like Aho, who is one of our panelists, like Jack Tannous at Princeton today, were lucky enough to have received a solid Western, in quote, Western formal education that allowed us to compete for acceptance at universities as students and then to receive academic or research positions in the workplace. But how about a kid coming out of the seminary of Mor Gabriel in the remote mountains of Tur Abdin? How is he to sit, albeit informally, at Syriac courses at a premier institution like Oxford to study with Sebastian, to do a PhD with Kathleen at Princeton Theological Seminary, and end up being involved here at Sankt Ignatios, someone like Mor Polycarpos? How about a Shamosho serving his church faithfully in a city like war-torn Aleppo? How is he to obtain a PhD and take on research and lectureship positions at Western universities, like Ephraim Ishaq? Sometimes in the late 1990s, when I was a research scientist at Bell Labs, I remember I called Sidney Griffith and talked of a dream to establish a center that could prepare heritage students for integration in Western-style academia for the purpose of Syriac studies. And it was for that purpose that I moved to rename the Syriac Computing Institute to Beth Mardutho. It was Kathleen McVeigh who partnered with me to register Beth Mardutho as a nonprofit in the state of New Jersey. But the dream never materialized, that is the dream of bringing the students to prepare them. Some years later, our panelist, Aho Shimon Qasho, began to speak of a bigger dream, to have a Syriac program that serves heritage students under the umbrella of a larger university, and I thought he was crazy. But I was wrong, and now he, of course, with the support of his colleagues in Salzburg, have established a good program in Salzburg. Our other panelists, Michael Yelm of Sankt Ignatios and Samuel Rubinson of Lund University, labored in creating a theological program in Sankt Ignatios to serve heritage students, and you see them here amongst us, and I was happy to see that it's male and female, which is a good thing. Not to mention helping heritage students study for degrees that are far from the domain of Syriac studies at the larger Sankt Ignatios. Where I have failed at Beth Mardutho, they succeeded. Last summer, I was visiting Aho, and we began to reminisce about our different experiences. We talked about Sankt Ignatios, the Syriac seminary at Ma'arat Saidnaya, and the Neo-Aramaic program that Shabutalai has in Berlin, in addition to our respective Beth Mardutho and Salzburg. And we concluded that we should call for a meeting to discuss collaboration amongst these institutions. A short time later, before we even did anything about this, we received independently an invitation from our friends at Sankt Ignatios for a meeting for the same purpose. So this was a great thing. So Sankt Ignatios organized a successful workshop that was held at Mor Ephraim Seminary in Holland, hosted by Mor Polycarpos. It is this topic of Syriac education that pertains mostly to heritage students, with the goal of building a bridge between the heritage and academic spheres. That is the topic of our final panel in this splendid conference to honor our Malfono Urabod Malfone. Let's hear from our panelists. We'll keep it short, about 5 minutes each, because we would like to open the floor for a longer discussion. Thank you. So maybe we will start Aho, and then we go that way. So,
Thank you, George. Yes, I will focus just on this point which you mentioned at the end, which I experienced when I studied here in Europe. I came as refugees in 1980s as a child with my parents, studied in Germany first, and then I had, of course, a great chance, thanks to Sebastian, to accept me without knowing English from Oxford University. And so in this context, he suffered a lot with me until I could write something that was understandable. And yes, the idea was for me to open a way for the Syriac community to benefit from all this great knowledge which has been studied and is present in the Western University with you. And we are belonging more or less like to the first generation. Of course, few individual people were there before, even like Patriarch Zaka. He was in the States and studied there and so on. But we are still, I think, belonging to sort of to the proper real generation, being born in the homeland and study in the West and realizing how much knowledge, how much results exist here among the Western scholars. And we were surprised, and we wanted to learn more and to go this way also to be able to take part in the conferences. One of the first conferences was actually on Jacob of Edessa in Leiden. Herman Teule, he left, I think, where I met the first sort of big group of Syriac scholars. And I remember he talked to me and to Mor Polikarpos. We both were students in Oxford at that time in 1996. He said, we are very pleased to have Syriac scholars with us. And we were just little students still. We didn't consider ourselves as scholars at that time, certainly not me. Now what we are in this context, as a scholar to say, what I learned in the West, to open the door to the community who lives and still care about this tradition, that is this living tradition. And as a member of this community, also to open the door for Western scholars more to study and to work in direction to these people. As you know, in the past, not anymore now yet, but has been the Syriac studies more is something like a dead tradition. Past, looking, the language, everything. It wasn't a living heritage, but it is still a living heritage. And in the context of our historical, political situation, it is endangered, absolutely endangered to survive in our century. And one way to contribute to this survival of this living heritage is through education. Even here looking in Sweden, looking in Germany, where most of the Syriac Orthodox community lives, but also others, Syrian Catholic, etc. They haven't got any way of training people for the service in the church, and neither in the schools. No teachers, no priests, no even for monks. Because all the centers in the Middle East, which exist until the end of the 19th century, they collapse one by the others. They're still, of course, there. Symbolically, they're doing great work, and we wish to continue and to remain still a symbol of hope for us. But they haven't got this capacity anymore to provide a proper training education, like had been in Talada, like in Qeneshrin, like in Nisibi school in the past. And certainly not like here what we see in the Western universities. So, and between that monastic tradition, which was in the past very rich, and the modern academic tradition now in the West, Salzburg should offer a bridge. So to bring both tradition in one way or the others together. And we have managed so far to start with this project to have a proper academic master degree for 2 years at the university, and the scholars are here. And thank you again to Sebastian for all helping in building it up and also coming on almost annual basis to teach there for 2 or 3 weeks. But also to the others who are here, like Herman Teule, George has been there, Mor Polikarpos, and so on. Basically offering a master course like you know it, just normal in the Western tradition. The other side is of the whole this training system is to have also a house where offers the atmosphere of monastic life, like a theological seminary, and where the student can live together, those who wants, yeah, live there together, pray together in the morning, noontime, and evening, and also have additional training, a curriculum in the house in terms of improving their language to become like a normal spoken language, classical Syriac, I mean, yeah, or to practice also the Syriac hymns and chants in the service, or to reflect more on the spiritual way also of life and call, being for priesthood, being for any service, pastoral, etc., in the society, and with this context also to help principally the integration of the Syriac community in positive sense here in the West. So this is a project, and this is one way which I think we as scholars should focus with our work towards the living community, and also try to open the doors to have more students coming from this society and to study and to learn more about their tradition. And they can learn it here in the West, in the Western universities with you. Thank you.
You hear me? Yeah. I will ponder upon a biblical text, and that is Mary of Bethany is washing the feet of Christ. And at her side, you have Jude. And Jude is a bit hesitant towards saying anything about her, except criticizing her. But he's invited by this act, because the question is, what is the purpose of an act of Mary of Bethany? And the answer by some of the fathers is that there is no purpose. It's an end in itself to wash the feet of Christ. So Jude is invited to praise Mary for this act. And this is the act of Akina, to praise this, to lift up a thanksgiving for this act. Not to explain it, but to praise it. That's the language of theology, the language of praising. This is a very important perspective in most of Oriental Orthodox churches. I met with another group, the Ethio-Eritrean teachers of our school, and they explained for me that we have 3 houses. We have the Tergum Bet, the Kenebet, and the Semabet. The house of hearing, the house of explanation, and the house of hymns. I said, what is the house of theology? There is no house of theology. It's a combination of these 3 houses. I began to have a kind of discussion with these fellows, and they explained for me, without the house of hymns, the Kena house, you wouldn't have a language for praise. And what would theology be without a language of praise? That's a good comment. But what would theology be without explanations? You need to have both. But without praying, what would theology be then? So we need all 3 houses. So where is the academy? And where is the rest of education in this? I think that the Ethio-Eritrean tradition explains this very well. It's 3 aspects of education. Students have to learn how to pray, if it's a theological education. Students need to learn how to articulate the language of the fathers. Not just be able to talk Sabonoyo, or Ge'ez, or Church Greek or something, or Church Slavonic. No, it's more, and that's what I appreciate with Sebastian Brock, and also Andrew Lauf in his books, last 2 lecturers. That is to articulate the language of theology. And translations are very important. Youths and people studying, they also have to learn how the language functions in their own tongue, like English, Swedish, and other languages. But they also need to be directed back towards the sources. And theological education for the future, if it is to be relevant, has to have these 3 perspectives. And I don't think there is a theological education. That's in between these 3 houses. and we have to learn to understand how they interact. And they interact in the church, not in academy. In the academy, they have to be distinct, these three houses. Explanations, language, and the way of prayer. We call it sometimes liturgics, but liturgy. They have to be distinct in academy. Otherwise, we take over what the church is supposed to be doing. The interaction between these three houses. I think this is the vision I'm trying to articulate, not just for Syriac Christian studies, but also for Eritrean studies. It's harder to discuss it with Byzantines, because in Byzantine tradition, the empire has taken over almost everything in the theological thinking. So we have a hard way to renew the Byzantine theological tradition. It's much easier in the Oriental traditions, because they still preserve the idea of his three perspectives. And this would be my contribution, at least, for this discussion, of articulating a new way of understanding theological education, the language of the fathers, the way of prayer, and the explanations has to be distinct in the academy, but they have to be together in the church. Thank you.
This has been a wonderful occasion also to reflect on what, in a way, what my vocation has become. And now I realize that I was born and brought up to become a bridge. In my childhood, I was standing in two cultures, and many people thought they were incommensurable. My father was a teacher at the Addis Ababa University, a very Western educational system, but extremely interested in the educational traditions of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And one of my important memories, I understand that it's been more important than I've ever thought, was in the late 60s. I was a kid in the German school in Addis Ababa, Deutsches Gymnasium, and we had a visit of Professor Friedrich Heyer, the German church historian, who was extremely interested in the Oriental churches and especially the Ethiopian. He was visiting Ethiopia. He had got to know my father, and since I knew German better than my father, I was asked to join them for a trip to the Zukwala monastery. And during that trip, I had a lot of talk. I was only 14, 15 years old, with Friedrich Heyer, who explained everything about traditional Ethiopian church education to me. And I then talked to my father about it and the difference between the Western style education and the concept of knowledge, of teaching, and the Ethiopian. And then I read Friedrich Heyer's book, Die Kirche Äthiopiens, which came out in 1971. I think it was the first academic book I ever read. I was still in the gymnasium at that time. And the book is very much about traditional education in the Ethiopian church. And then I left that, but I now understand that very much of my subsequent research, and especially on monasticism and its role in transforming classical education and the educational traditions of monasticism that I've learned to know, studying the sayings, but also reading Adam Becker's very important book on the School of Nisibis, that there is a connection here that in the Christian Orient, very much of an early and even, say, Greco-Roman and Jewish educational traditions have been preserved. Now, how are we able to make the best of the encounter between these quite different understandings of education, the Western school system with its roots in the Enlightenment and the Eastern tradition with its roots in the Greco-Jewish world what it is to educate, what it is to come to know, what it is to be formed. In the 1990, I was employed by the diocese, by the Bishop of Strängnäs, in which Diocese Södertälje is also situated, the Church of Sweden, for dealing with ecumenical affairs and the question of immigration and refugees. So I met with the Syrian Orthodox bishop in Södertälje. At that time there was only one. And we started to talk about this. And so we actually started attempts to have small seminars, courses for Syrian Orthodox priests to have come to Sweden to understand in which society they had now settled. And we actually tried also to start a school, but that didn't work out due to problems in between fractions in the church. But I now am so happy that I'm again, through Sankt Ignatios, involved in this issue of education. And I think what is important for us is to create an educational setting that is not just a copy of Western educational traditions, but integrates the deep understanding of what it is to educate, what it is to learn, what knowledge is, drawing also from the traditions of both the Ethiopian and, as I realize, the Syrian tradition that have very much in common. I think it's very clear that the Ethio-Eritrean church traditions and the Syriac have much more in common, being more cut off from the Byzantine than, for instance, the Coptic. So that's my input for the time being.
Thank you very much. What I would like to do is open the floor for discussion. This way it will be more beneficial than you hearing more from us. So if anybody would like to say anything, Susan?
First, I want to thank all of you for both your very eloquent statements this morning and also the vision that you have brought, each of you, to this, it's more than a project, to this work. And I also know from my own conversations with all of you that you are very concerned also about the question of women and the education of women. But I really want to bring that up, and I want to bring it up for several reasons. Some years ago, I have been studying these women's choirs in Syriac for some years, and some years ago I presented a paper in Toronto at, what is the church, Father Stephen, I think, Amir Harak took me.
Yeah, not Barsa, no, the other one.
And,
Yeah.
and I spoke at the parish. And there were some, it was quite moving. There were some hundreds of people, and partway through my talk, the priest stopped me and said, "We have a women's choir." And he had them stand up from all around the room, and everyone applauded, you know, they were very proud. Well, afterwards, this choir took me to the side. They were weeping. They said no one ever told them that what they did was important. I still weep when I think about this. How is this not important? Who is carrying the knowledge that's being carried? So it's not just a knowledge of the fathers, that's the knowledge the literature carries. But the knowledge of the living tradition is also something that wouldn't be there if the women weren't carrying that and teaching that through the singing and their own participation in the community. I remember some years ago when Mor Polycarpus was still a deacon, we had a discussion perhaps on Kathleen McVeigh's porch at the Syriac Symposium, and you were very concerned about the question of how to keep the girls and the women in the church, to how to find work for them to do. So in the process of education, I think one of the challenges, also the barriers, is a very different way that girls are socialized in the community. I want to speak about something that is my own experience, and find a way of also reaching out to the girls and making sure that the women too can be part of this very important journey to bridge between these worlds, but also to carry these forms of knowledge. So I know that's part of all of your visions, and I hope you will really seek to articulate a way of doing that very directly. Thank you.
Susan, thank you for this statement. And myself, I really do believe in less than 10 to 15 years, with this project in Salzburg, if it will continue, there will be more women studying than men. And I can say also why. Because if I see in Germany, I know the situation in Germany better than here in Sweden, I can say. In Germany, we have got the opportunity of religious education in the state schools, public schools. And we have got now also the opportunity to teach language as a mother language. But the second one, teaching language, Syriac as a mother language, we haven't got teacher because they need to be qualified. There's no a single system in Germany to train people from the Syriac tradition to teach Syriac as a mother tongue. They can go do something Orientalistic, etc., like in Berlin or Semitic studies. Yes, there's languages, there are also few doing it. But there's this sort of this training system not there yet. But in principle, if I look at a number of students who are studying to become general teachers in Germany, we have got more female students becoming in near future normal general teachers for public schools than male. And this will be certainly also for religious education and for any other normal work in a society or in a community, and even up to the pastoral work. Yeah? And so far, about Salzburg, there's only one female student from Thessaloniki. For the coming years, there's 3 on the list to come: Armenian, Syriac one, and another one from the Church of the East from Mosul.
And to answer Susan more, as for the life of the church, a change has to take place. I belong to a small parish, Cranberry, near close to Princeton, and it's a particular parish because there is a lot of, it's a small parish, maybe 10, 15 families. There's a lot of intermarriage. And we have the tradition of the boys going on the altar, but then the girls have nothing to do. And I brought up the subject that we need to get the girls on the altar. And in fact, I did it a few times when I was as a head of the deacon and ignoring ecclesiasts maybe. But it has to be done more formally, because then the girls feel that, the only thing I can do is the choir, and the choir is great, obviously, but you want more avenues for them. You want the boys to be able to be in the choir, to be on the altar, and to be Sunday school teacher, and. So that is going to require a change. Luckily, we have this mission, not mission church now, it's a formal diocese in South America. And obviously, it's all on Facebook, and we see all these ladies on the altar. And if they can do it, and now they're part of the Syriac Orthodox Church, why can't we do it? So that could be a positive thing to make an argument that this shift needs to take place. But it does need to take place, especially in the West, because if you lose, we're having a hard time keeping the kids. If you lose half of the kids, all the females, it's a disaster. But let's hear from people.
Yes, small comment. The issue of female participation is also an issue of lay participation. I'm a layman. I have nothing to do with the church's hierarchy. Whenever I participate in a conference, and sometimes I'm even a keynote speaker, and they believe I'm a priest, so they invite me to, go through the chapel or something like that to reach for the podium to have a speech. And then I'm stopped, so I cannot reach the podium for where I'm supposed to be speaking. In one conference, I was a keynote speaker and arrived late. I was placed in the back of everything. I met approximately 200 people there. The back with some women and some lay professors. And they were speaking about me on the podium. I didn't hear anything. And suddenly they come forward to me saying that you will have a prize. Will you say something as a thanksgiving for this prize? I was saying, what? I didn't hear anything. So this is a situation that many women experience, being back in the end, cannot participate in the practical sense. And that's the major problem for today, I think, that we have a practical way of dealing with laity and women that actually make them embarrassed, diminished, and also out of participation. So we have changed our way of organizing conferences, especially within the churches. We have to think about these aspects. And wouldn't I have experienced this as a layman, being a keynote speaker in some conference, for example? I wouldn't have understood this. I went in the top layer of everything. So this was a very important experience for me to understand that the practical situation has to be changed. And that's why many female scholars hesitate of being in the center. Just because they are not used to it. But thanks to Catherine McVeigh and Susan Ashbrook Harvey, they are breaking the way for a new way. They cannot ignore you, because that will be embarrassing for others instead. So.
Anyone else?
It's great what is going on here. I just see one problem, and you already alluded to it a bit when discussing that the church needs to adapt to women to be more visible in. The adaptation. Oh, I wrote something down. The adaptation to living here in the Western diaspora. One of the problems is you need many fish in the pond to catch the ones you need for the training that you are offering. So what I'm talking about is how well is the knowledge within the community living in Sweden, Germany, wherever, of language and culture. You were born in the Middle East, but they have now second, third generations people who go to school, and in school they speak Swedish, Dutch, German, whatever. You kind of have to entice them to prepare themselves to go to your place. They have to know culture and language in a way that is attractive to them. So you can't just give them the culture like a taxidermist would prepare a dead animal and it would always stay the same. It has to be adapted to the life here. What are the ideas of disseminating on a more basic level culture, language, within the wider surroundings? The reason why I picked the microphone instead of the person I think who should have done that is Shabutalai, but sadly he's not here, is, for example, he created that, he tries to use the internet to contact these people. Because if you create it in institutions, most of the youth is not interested in going to summer school, because they have so many friends and they want to do all kinds of stuff, other stuff, like their friends. I talk too much. Any ideas, any further developments on that more elementary level? So not on the academic level, but the preparation to the academic level.
I'd like to make is this on, yeah? I don't have a proposal, but my experience has been that when in the 90s I started to talk in Syrian Orthodox parishes and communities about the history and the traditions of the Syrian Orthodox Church, it's quite interesting that the older generations, that is the second generation, they they were a bit reluctant, and they had come to Sweden to go into the modern world, and they thought that what I was talking about was their parents' tradition. But the younger ones, the third generation, they were more interested. And what's happening in Sweden now, it's very clear that there is a growing interest among those who have been born and brought up in Sweden for their own heritage and for the traditions. Because for them it's exciting and it's a search for roots. So I think if you have a critical mass, which we actually have in many places in Sweden, also in the schools, in the general schools, there are so many with this background that it's unavoidable that you start to talk about it. But of course, it's very good if you find methods, especially perhaps through the internet, of promoting this. But my experience is that it's actually more interest now than 20 years ago.
You need to offer them.
Yeah.
You hear me? One of the things that, if I compare different traditions or cultures, one of challenges is if you have a huge tradition, like for example the Greeks, they reflect upon philosophy and everything, even among the youths. It doesn't mean that they're particularly interested, but they have a reference framework for many of their discussions and so on. So whenever I visit Greek community, not anymore here in Sweden, but in Norway and in other countries, I realize that that's an interest going back, and they have some certain knowledge about their past, so to say. When it comes to some of Oriental traditions, it's not the same case. Youth doesn't have an understanding of their past. So it means they don't have a reference framework for how to discuss their past. They actually create the past in the present. And they create the present, the past in the present in a way that they create new issues, new frameworks, and that creates conflicts. So these conflicts highlight new perspectives of their past. I would say, if it would be daring, say, they have nothing to do with the past sometimes. They're just a way of articulating a new identity. And this becomes problematic for small communities, especially small communities. And here we have to work much harder, not just to create institutions, not just to be able to highlight opportunities. We have to work what is in between courses, studies, and so on. And I think that Gabriel Barsame, who is somewhere here, who is our new academic dean for the college, one of his workloads will be on establishing a discussion that is actually taking care of a Syriac perspective in the past, but in a way that is accessible for youths and a new generation, those born in Sweden, for example. And that's a huge work. It will take years just to establish a foundation for that discussion. And thanks to all of you, not just Sebastian, but all of you, you have created a load of information that we can make use of.
So we have a lot of Salam, and then next, and then we'll go to, so Salam.
Very loud voice, but I'll use it. Thank you for that discussion. I don't really have anything to contribute, so I'll just ask a straightforward question that's perhaps related. What are your thoughts on Syriac language pedagogy and its connection to a living tradition, be it in the Middle East or in diaspora?
I would suggest that Gabriel Barsame also answers this question, in fact. And you're here.
Before Aho speaks, he was in charge of the teachers in Germany for many years, so he knows what he's talking about.
You see, the reality is now, since we have moved to Europe, particularly in the last 3-4 decades, then with almost every small generation of 4-5 years, we see that the issue of language is declining. The language as being a living, spoken language among our Syriac people here is declining. And this trend, probably we cannot stop it. But in the process of our integration as a Syriac community and speaking still Syriac, one was the other dialect, and also as a religious community here, to look for a sound integration, you need to create a system. It's not going to happen automatically like it's happened in the past. And what has been done greatly in the last 3-4 decades, in Central Europe particularly through Bishop Julius Cicak, to establish parishes, to get people in one way or the other closer to each other, to have sense of community there, and to have a lot of different clubs, societies, and so on. The same is happened here in Sweden. And this was anything else than easy doing this. It was absolutely the challenge of the last 3-4 decades. But now, one can see it positively. We are in a lucky position. We have got the chance to go now to make use of these establishments. The structure in churches, in dioceses, in clubs, in societies, and in different whatever else is going on in every parish, women clubs, children, and so on. But one aspect what is missing regarding the language as well as regarding the theology is actually what here Michael says, is the knowledge, the awareness of the importance of this tradition and how to do it. How to do it, how to find a way of survival. What are the methods of our survival here as a culture in the West? We can't say this. We haven't got them. Because this is another aspect which we haven't talked about it at all in this conference, in terms of future studies in context of Syriac studies. The social and cultural aspect, the developments of the present development of the Syriac communities. Who is analyzing it? Who is watching it? Who is studying from sort of all kind of other point of view? We have only few people like, Nauris, she did some work. We had a little project in Salzburg with Andreas Schmoller and so on. But we have got people like Dorothea Welteke focusing. Helen Muren, yes, doing. We have got few people, but still this field is not studied properly and need to be more work on it in order to look really for a way, also for us, for me particularly, to look away, how can we, in the context of theology, how can we find really a channel, a system that we can keep the Syriac Christianity as a religious community still alive? Because you know all these problems of the modern society through whatever other reasons problems here, particularly in the West, that the children doesn't take automatically the face of their parents. And the problems that we have got, you have got them too. But the other thing is still what is good in the Syriac community, which I experienced as a child and is still there. Most of the people know little bit about it. They know that it's important, but they don't know what it is. And this was one of the drive for me when I was a teacher in the religious education in North Rhine-Westphalia, working with 23 teachers there. And in bracket, all these teachers actually, they were not qualified according to the modern system here in the West to teach. They came just from their normal experience as a Sunday school teachers. We had the permission to teach in public school. They start teaching there. They have to learn the methods properly, how to structure a lesson, how to structure a series of lessons, how to interpret the metaphor, and so on. All these things we have to go with them. But then I realized the problem with these local teachers, etc. We can do it here locally. But what about the other places? And then, of course, the logic consequence is you need a place to train people to go into the parishes, to go into the schools, to go into the society. And it will take certainly another 2 or 3 decades, 4 decades, until we can figure out the proper methods, hopefully, of a normal way of surviving.
Very short comment since Gabriel is hesitating about answering my challenge. Together with the Jerusalem Policy Institute, we are developing a new methodology for classical languages. And Gabriel is very humble, but he's taking care of this. First language, we are restoring the Coptic language as a spoken language together with a French institute and the Jerusalem Policy Institute. And it's participation with the Coptic Church in this project. The second is that we're developing a spoken way of gaze together with the Ethio-Eritrean community with some very eminent linguists. And thirdly, and not least important, we also develop a new methodology for classical Syriac. And it's based on a very special immersion method that's taken partly from how Jewish immigrants has been taught in Hebrew in Israel. But it's also a link towards using Toroyo as a link towards Thobonoyo in the long run. And I think this is most interesting. I'm not an expert in this at all. I don't know anything. So if you have any questions, you should ask Gabriel Barsame, or George Kira has also been involved in this.
One of the issues of pedagogy, I can speak for the US and maybe to some extent also here it is in Europe. The language is taught in the communities, in various schools. But the objective when teaching, for example, the deacons is to read and to read faster and faster. So and some of the kids who go to the Syriac school, because it's not very well structured, they end up every summer they go, they're repeating, they're starting from the beginning. It reminds me, I grew up in German schools, and in every grade, we started with the Der, Die, Das again and again. That was in Bethlehem. So it's like read faster and faster, and then they don't really get a good grip on the classical language. Sometimes people who use it and know it in terms of reading and the liturgy, they want to come to my summer class and they think, they're just going to come to Syriac 2. I'm like, no, you're sitting in Syriac 1. We need to get a grip on the grammar and on the and on the usage. We had a question here, then we will go. Oh no, you do. Okay. Beryl, you had a question, or?
It was just a comment from New Zealand, where I grew up. The Maori language was not used when I was young. Really, the only people who spoke Maori were the old people. Now Maori is an official language, and you can have your court case in Maori if you want. The change came when it was the Maori grandmothers who started Language Nest, and they had preschool children, just a normal kindergarten. They weren't trained, not anything, it was just the grandmothers conducting preschool programs in Maori. Those kids went to primary school and wanted more Maori, so more Maori had to be introduced, and now you can go right up through everything. But just to say that the turning point, the beginning point, was the grandmothers getting together and teaching the kids in Maori.
Thank you. Maybe we can have one more. Sebastian, did you want to say something? And then we'll have a concluding remarks, because some of us have to run to airports.
No, what I wanted to add is that I think music is one of the ways of combining education in the tradition with something that for young children especially is fun. So I would always like to see these dialogue poems that I'm so interested in set to music and acted out, perhaps readapted for a more modern audience, but the structure I think is a very nice one, and they are excellent catechetical material.
Maybe it's time to conclude, because there's the closing session. Two things I would like to say, one depressing and one positive. To the depressing point, in the West, longevity of the community is obviously, as Aho said, is in danger. And as positive as we would like to be, there are realities. Every time we go to a funeral, I always say, we probably are burying today 50, 60 people. Because if it's a grandpa, you look at the parish and you see all these kids and grandkids and whatnot that you've never ever seen in your life, and that's the last time you're going to see them. If we take the US, because that's the longest history we've had Suryoya in the US since the 1800s. Beginning in the 1800s, but by the 1890s there were communities. Until this day, not a single priest was ordained that was born in the US. The old-timers, the Americans, in quotes, that's what we call them, the old-timers, not that many of them left. You go to a parish and you could see 5 families, where there probably should be 400 or 500 families. And the continuity of the church in the West goes on because of continuous immigration, but the well is drying up in the Middle East. War after war, that's taking care of the spring and of the well. So it is a dangerous time. We don't know how long we can survive. And I know it's always good to be positive rather than negative, but we must know what the reality is in order to act. Otherwise, you know, if you put your head in a bubble, then you can't act. Sorry to end on a depressive note, but to a positive note, on behalf of everybody who came here, on behalf of the participants, I really would like to thank our hosts. Thank you so much. Robert, also, for everyone who worked to bring us here. And if there was no Sebastian, we won't be here. So thank you so much, Sebastian, for being born.
I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everyone for taking the trouble of coming all this way, and an even huger thank you to all the people who organized and hosted it. It's been quite an amazing, although quite embarrassing occasion, but I've enjoyed it enormously, and so a huge thank you to everyone, and especially to Bob, who is, as it were, masterminded so brilliantly and so discreetly, if I may say so. So thank you. Taudi Saiki.